Do you think we should start, Robin, or you think we should give it a minute?
Yeah, I think we should start probably. Just, oh, here comes Deborah Kapori.
It's my video.
Yeah, we're live streaming now. I don't think we have a quorum though. So we would not do the minutes yet. Oh, looks like Trina got disconnected. Hang on a second. She's coming back. Okay, now we have a quorum. So we can go ahead and get started, Trina, unless you, would you like the co-chairs to take over since you're having some internet personal stuff going on? Okay, Sishen, why don't we go ahead and get started with you doing the minutes? Let me go to the next slide here. Um,
Um, okay, I guess I'll call the meeting to order then. Is there like a procedure for that, or is that good enough?
Perfect.
Okay, and I'd like to motion that we adopt the meeting minutes for last week's meeting.
Second.
Was that Isla who seconded?
Isla, yeah.
Okay.
All in favor then? Can't really tell if anyone is voting in the. Okay, there we go. That looks good. Yeah.
So everyone was in favor? Is that
Seems like it, yes.
okay? All right. So Trina, we just did the minutes and Sishan's like called the meeting to order and did the minutes. Do you want him to continue to?
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm trying to
Yeah.
get my phone to do audio. Okay? Thank you. Thank you for being patient. Thank you, Satan.
Yeah.
That was great.
Okay, great. Well, let me get started with a few of these slides, and then we're going to leave lots of time for discussion and conversation today as well. Welcome, everyone. This is the criteria we've had in a couple of times. We'll just come back to this if there's questions, but I'm not going to spend the time reading it at this time. There were some questions emailed to me, and I just wanted to try to clarify and then see if there were further questions about kind of like our process and what will happen next. So the goal of today's meeting would be to recommend the distribution of the full $1 million. We believe that the best way to inspire future donations is to allocate these funds well. And we would, the PAC committee will continue to track and engage with what those investments are. First, it will go to the board for a first reading, April 8th, and then it would 30 days later at their May meeting, would have a final vote. So all along that path and through implementation, the PAC would be updated on what's happening. The PAC could also set a future goal for fundraising to inspire giving, either at this meeting or at a future meeting. So if we feel like $1 million would best be allocated a certain way, but we wanted to set a goal that says that if we raise this amount, then we would recommend we investing it a different way or doing the same thing and adding on. That's an opportunity. I just want to propose that as a potential way of having an investment and a goal. And then what we have spoken about over the last couple of meetings, the proposals we've discussed have mainly been programmatic. Alternatively, it could be a formula, and it could be a formula that divides funding by school, or by a certain amount per student. So we could spend a little time discussing that today. And we could also state a future goal of, oh, I just saw one person's waiting. Sorry. For an endowment or reserve fund, but this would best be communicated before people donate to that, as opposed to taking that money out of the $1 million. So an endowment is typically set an amount where you're only spending the interest on it. But you could have a goal for an endowment that you're going to keep accumulating a certain amount in that fund, and then before you start spending it. A reserve fund would be something more of like what PPS does, is like set aside money for a rainy day fund, for emergencies or things that happen. That could also be a possibility. Just like kind of a different term, and that would be more of like money you would tap into when there is a particular emergency or need that arises. And then the staff are responsible for implementing the charter that was proposed to the board and passed by the board. And that's what established the parameters of the committee and the membership and the terms. So some of you who are on the committee, the terms will end June 30 of this year, because it's a one-year appointment, and some it would be next June. The reason for that is sort of like the staggering of people, so that we would have some people continuing on and new people joining, so that you have some continuity as it moves forward. I know it hasn't been a full year, and that's kind of disappointing, maybe disappointing for people. If there is interest from anyone who's on this committee, it's ending June 30 and running again, please do let me know, and I will get clarification about that. Like, because we do have that on some committees, but that wasn't really defined in this charter. There also is typically with the policies, there's an administrative directive that accompanies it, and that has not been written yet for this policy. There was some conversations with our legal counsel about letting the PAC do its work, have a clear definition of like what's going to happen moving forward, and then we would work on that administrative directive. But that is typically something that is prepared by staff with legal counsel and the superintendent's approval. Then it that's how it is brought forth. I don't know, Deborah, do you have anything you want to add about that or any feedback on that?
No, I think you've covered it. I'm happy to answer questions if folks have it, though.
Okay. So there was also a question brought up about the idea of like a formula that to be based on the percentage, splitting it like what we had before. The policy was that schools who fundraised could keep the money be over $10,000 if they contributed 33% to the shared fund. And I think there was the suggestion of maybe just like flipping those amounts of like, well, what if we allowed, what if 70% was shared? Like, could that be the formula? But our understanding of the policy is that it shouldn't be based on schools fundraising, that it's really the accounting is like a combined district-wide account. So that model is no longer valid for like what we're working on. But that's not to say there couldn't be other formulas that could be introduced. We're just saying that one would not be valid. And then just the last couple of points here, and then I'm going to stop for questions or discussion on any of these items, preliminary process items. Both PPS and the Fund for PPS will support the fundraising and marketing for future donations. And if the PAC wants to recommend a portion of the funding to be set aside for fundraising and or marketing, we would just recommend that we keep that dollar amount relatively low compared to the total of the $1 million, and potentially propose an alternative so that, say, for example, the Board of Education said, no, we don't want any of the money to go towards that. We would have like an alternative listed in the policy, so it wouldn't be going back to the drawing board. You see what I mean? So that could be something we could include in our recommendation. So is there any questions or discussion on those process questions or points that people would like raised at this time before we get more into some of the formulas and program proposals?
I had a question, Robin.
Yeah.
I wanted to explore why we think the number needs to be low for fundraising. I think fundamentally, I'm just concerned that, I want this to be a huge success. I want this to take the burden off families to, be volunteering and fundraising. I would love there to be a robust system with volunteers, but also professionals to really make this so super successful. And I just don't know how we would do that without a seed capital. And I've just talked to, I'm on the Dunaway Foundation. I talked to the foundation last night and they totally on board with that. They're like, yeah, great idea. We want to make this a success. And I think it's great to put money towards that. So I don't see parents or foundations objecting to some of that money not being used, at least in the folks I've talked to. So why would that be negatively looked on?
Well, I think that that's good information for us to hear. it's more just historical, you know, that the funds that were raised by school foundations, there was 0% taken out for administrative fee or overhead or operating costs. The fund, when we presented the new charter in front of the board, we did talk about adding 5% for future donations so that there would be some amount that is taken out to continue, you know, the operations. So if the committee has a larger number in mind, then that is fine. And I would just recommend that we kind of have a backup so that if they were to say no, that we would not be starting from scratch. I guess that's what I'd recommend on that.
And I'm just going to jump in here. Sorry, it's Deborah Kafori, Chief of Staff. I would, you know, if this group decides that's where they want to spend their money, this money, that's where this group decides they want to offer to the board, I would just advise to have a backup plan in case they don't agree. And so maybe, you know, it is a little bit risky because I don't think it's what they were thinking of, but that doesn't mean that, you know, they'll say no. I just think it's probably a good idea to have some kind of backup, like a second choice if they decide that they don't want this one. Robin, you want to continue calling on folks, or who's chairing the meeting? Who has their hands up?
Let's see. Looks like Suzanne and Audrey do. Go. Suzanne, you want to go?
Oh, I thought Daniel had his up, but it's gone down. So I just want to voice my support for Isla's statements about the need for seed money, and that I have also been reaching out to not only people in communities that don't traditionally did not have foundations, but people outside of the Portland school district. And that just the feedback was that that type of starting funds would be really necessary for this to be a successful endeavor. And we're already a little late to the game on this, and kind of trying to play catch up. So I think it could potentially demonstrate how serious we are about this. And if it would help with the board, I think it's worth saying we have every intention of getting to the point where we have an endowment. That's how serious we are about this. And I don't see any difference between seed capital and saying that we, you know, might be pushing for an endowment as well. And it is also not the same policy as it once was. This is a new animal. And for that reason, we encourage operating it differently. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Audrey?
Sorry, I have multiple monitors. While I don't think that should be necessarily the majority of our fees, I think spending a portion of them, while we say that there was no administrative fees set up in the past with how the money was raised, being a part of a foundation and knowing the amount of manpower that it took to raise those funds was a lot of time for a lot of people. And if we're not working on a volunteer platform here, if I just question, like, we're no longer based on a per school community platform, which is one way to bring in donations, because people know that the money that they're donating, the majority of it's going to go to their school, and we're not, and also those people volunteering to bring in that money. I guess I would question if we have a future in the funding of this project if we don't have some kind of money to help us facilitate getting donations in the future, I'm not sure how we're supposed to grow that capital.
Thank you.
And if you guys have any like ideas of how that would happen without, or Deborah, if you have ideas of how we would raise that money without having some money volunteer based, how would that work?
I mean, I think it's a good question, and I personally don't have any pushback on wanting to use it for fundraising. I just suggested, my suggestion was just have it back in case of the board, because I actually haven't talked to them about their thoughts, and I know that, I mean, honestly, having a parent community come forward and put forth a recommendation, I think, especially one that they appointed, does politically make it a little bit more difficult for them to not accept what you are offering. But I think it would be good, because I just don't know what I think in their minds, they were thinking staffing or program or something, and I don't know that they'd considered it. Again, not that it's a bad idea. Looks like David has his.
Yeah, no, I just want to, kind of support what the comments have been presented previously, is that, yeah, there is a fundraising component to this. It's not necessarily stated in the charter, but certainly what's been communicated to us is that we're building a framework for funding in the future. We need to grab people's attention for future donations. So, what's been communicated to us really strongly lends itself to applying these funds to some type of fundraising allocation. And so, I don't want to get stuck on this 5% thing, but certainly I think a fair amount of funds, I think, should go to some fundraising allocation. So I just want to, reiterate that. And that's it for now.
Thank you. Okay, let me just go through some more slides here, and then we'll certainly have more time for discussion.
Oh, Robin, Isla and somebody had their hand up as well. It's very hard for me to see this tiny little screen. But I did see that a couple more folks had their hands up. I don't know if you guys wanted to wait, hold your questions, or.
I can ask it now, or it sounded like Robin wanted to keep going, so I can also ask it later. It was more, if we decide to give more, I'd love to have more nuance, Robin, on the fundraising plan and what a larger number would be that you would think would be useful for you. Because I was thinking like hundreds of thousands of dollars, certainly not $1 million, but not 35,000 either. So we can keep that for later, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, let's circle back to that. So this was kind of a new proposal that I just included based on some questions about, what would a formula look like. So we, as a district, we know about like per student amounts that vary, and we get money from the state and on per student basis. So as our enrollment decreases, our amount goes down. So this is kind of a typical way that the budgets are calculated, through our government. So basically what I did is I just took the $1 million and divided it by the number of students in the district. And that's where I came up with the $24, so it was like a reverse number to get to that. And then there is an attachment in our materials that took the enrollment numbers we have from October and multiplied the $24 by the number of students enrolled in each school. And mainly that's because there is some very big differences in the sizes of many of our schools. And it includes the alternative schools as well, based on the number of students. That this number is not exact and the numbers in that table are not exact, but it's just to give you an idea of like what that could look like. I think it might be informative to just look at are you seeing the table now with the dollars? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So these are, it's listed, the elementary schools are listed first. And so and then in the blue is the total for all elementary schools. So that there's 19,000 and some students in elementary schools. And then that equals just under 500,000 there. And then our middle schools are typically larger, but there's a lot fewer of them. And then same with our high schools. There's a significant variance in the size of our high schools. So you can see, for instance, Grant has over 2,000 students. That would be 51,000, whereas Jefferson has just under 500. That's 11,000. So that's a huge variance in the dollar amount that those high schools would receive. But the total is 315,000. And then there's some alternative programs. We did not include the charter schools because they have their own budget formulas of how they're getting money. But that would bring us to 1,026,000. And then I wanted to see if Suzanne she provided a couple of tables that were more of like a school by school basis. Did you want to speak to that at this time?
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
You had earlier said that we're not going to revert back to the old formula.
Mhm.
So that was, I sent that in case that discussion came up.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, so that it's in our attachments in the written comments if people wanted to look at those. It does.
Robin, can I just say that it might be useful if we do go down the road of a equal allocation by school and not by enrollment. If we try to separate funds, I honestly, I think it just muddies the water.
Yeah.
I'll give that more thought if we need to bring it up.
Okay.
Sorry, I have my hand raised, but I just out of context, just because I know that the different charts can show different information, but if we are talking about price per student equivalents and what that looks like, and talking about how some schools get more than others, and I know I was told I couldn't share graphs, so I'm gonna just share it via my screen, which is not very big, but this was a graph that sorry, how do I do this? Struggle. This is a graph that I did. This is really hard. I can't share my screen, so this way. Last year. But one thing to note was these were just the elementary schools, and it's hard to tell, but this was every single school benefited from the foundations, whether it was schools benefiting from direct foundation raising, or if they were benefiting from the foundation fund. So again, like I asked earlier this year if I could share some graphs and like rechart the graphs, and I was told that we didn't know if that was possible, so I didn't redo it. But what we were told at that time was that the reason that the price per student was different was because some of those smaller schools still needed like the custodians and the administrative staff. So I want to just for context, I want to make sure that we're not missing that if we did do $25 per student, and I'm not saying that's what we should do, that that's a misalignment because schools that have bigger enrollment aren't getting, like, otherwise it's totally unfair, because I think that there's already, again, been a equation done that allocates for that. That's all I wanted to say.
So are you saying that a per school formula would be better than a per student? Is that?
No, I was just saying a per student
Mm.
in that context, I think would make more sense, because that's, I mean, if you actually look at how the fundraising equated overall, there was at least, I didn't run the same numbers through the middle school and the high schools, but with the previous foundation story, and we don't need to get into that, there wasn't a single K-5 that didn't receive money, and that was through the 23-24 school year.
Mm.
And that, like, the differences between what those minute things between the foundations who ran versus what the equation was of the funding they get from the state, it was pennies to the dollar compared to what the overall funding was. So I just want to put that in there for context as we talk about that, if we're going to talk about per student or per school.
Okay. Yeah. And you could submit things that it just would go in the public comment section. So sorry if that seemed like that was not allowed. I think we were just figuring out how we do comment at the very first meeting. So apologies if that was confusing and not communicated well. Okay, so
Actually, can I just make a clarification? There are many schools that traditionally did not receive any funds under the old foundation policy. And Robin, can you just verify that?
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I guess I would need to look at what.
I mean, my daughter's school didn't receive funds some year because they couldn't raise the funds and they didn't get grants. So I just want
Yeah.
there to be accurate information shared.
Sorry, and all I had, what the data I ran was a 2023 to 24, again, through K-5, and every school received something.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there, oftentimes what we saw with the school foundations that were fundraising and allocating staff, and then the 33% that was taken out and re-granted then went to the PPS Parent Fund Awards. That was based on a formula of the number of students qualified for free meals and the percentage of combined underserved students. So it ended up being like a lot of Title I schools and like a few more, but then there were schools in the middle that didn't have the local school foundation fundraising or a parent fund award. And that varied depending on the year and how much money there was. Like, so post-COVID, when there was, the numbers were quite small, that was actually kind of a large number, but then the fundraising started to ramp up. And so maybe it closed the gap in that year that Audrey is talking about. I'm not certain. So that is the amounts of the grants were typically between 10,000 and 30,000. So they were much smaller than what local school foundations raised. And there was usually a few, kind of like a bell curve, you know, a few that raised a lot, enough to have staff, and then a lot of local school foundations that just raised a little bit and tried to figure out what to do with it. So we had a lot of variability. There was no like level set that we could do with the monies we had. So, okay. I'm not sure if people had the opportunity to look at the handouts that were added to the website. I think the first one that I was able to add early in the week was prepared by the Learning Acceleration team. And it's just this, it's a one-pager that has links to the data that, but they also summarized it for us on this one-page executive summary. So there were three different programs that they were recommending for different grade levels. So the first one was the Paloma, and there were two there. So
I don't
that's,
mean to interrupt, but I think,
Yeah.
Sachin, do you still have your hand up for a question from the last piece?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like the whole do we fund students or schools and all of that stuff feels maybe less of an issue, and I might be reading this wrong, but I feel like most of what we've talked about as like viable things that we want to fund has been programs that would be across most schools or
Yeah.
across students that really need the help. And that's not necessarily something where how funding used to get distributed between schools actually matters, because it's focusing more on, can we get the stuff to the students that need it regardless of school, as opposed to like give money to each school like grants were used to be given.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong on that, if I'm misunderstanding the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So that was, I'm not trying to recommend that we do that formula. It was a question that I got, like, what would a formula even look like? So it was, yeah, it's just like something, as an example to show. But you're right, we haven't really been talking about that as much, and we try to, in the beginning, kind of steer away from the history and kind of look forward, like how can we build something new. So were people able to look at the video with the Paloma and how it works? Do people understand what it is? Do you want so there's like a 4-minute video. We could look at in this meeting later on if we're considering this and you want to understand it better. But basically it is an app. This is the only one that is an app, and this is the only one that would be done at home. But it is for kindergarten and first grade parents. And they would get a text 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. They don't have to log in or click, they just click on the app and it will have the lesson that the student is learning that week. It's aligned to the curriculum and what's being taught for literacy that week. And there's a part that the parent reads, and that's available in 14 languages, that tells them what they're doing, that what the lesson is. And then there's a part that they review with their student. And then there's a third part, which is like a book that is like the reward for the student. And the student gets to choose like the main subject that looks like them and their topic of interest, like dinosaurs or princess or something like that. And the story is then basically it uses AI and it like creates a story that includes that. And so that's like the reward for the student. And it's 15 minutes. And the
Robin, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. I feel like I don't mean to be rude, but I am terrified that we're gonna run out of time.
okay.
It's at 7 o'clock. And so I'm wondering if we can agree as a group to go through all the slides
Yeah.
and then move into discussion
Yeah.
without questions.
Okay.
Because we have 50 minutes and I think we've tried to extend the meeting before and it hasn't worked. And I don't think we'll get there, honestly, unless we just get through the slides and then do our discussion and questions separately.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I just read this and I was hoping everyone already read it.
Okay.
But
Yes.
That doesn't
So-
sound like a terrible idea.
what did you say?
That doesn't sound like a terrible idea to me.
Yes, I will move on. So the other one is for 5th graders, and it takes place during the school day, and it's like 500 students who are still struggling to read so that they enter middle school ready to read. And the third is for that teaches math skills, and it's the iExcel program, and that they would do that during the school day. And that's for 9th and 10th graders. And there's 2 different levels of how many students you could serve with that program. So let me just go back to the slides. There was some feedback from principals on those programs. Are you seeing that slide here? Okay. There were some positives and some like keys to success or things that they were wondering about. So I guess I would just say in general, you know, being able to have a lot of people impacting and seeing where the money is going. And even if it's not their child at their grade level, that they're talking about it, that their people see that things are happening in their school that are benefiting students, that is a positive. The food support being a huge need with the cuts happening in SUN programs and a lot of high price of food and the challenges our families are facing. And then there was, you know, concerns about the rollout of it and messaging and training for parents and the data collection and how information would be shared. And that was the general feedback on that one. This was we talked about, you know, the potential of if we funded it at the highest level, that would be 780,000, and there could still be 250,000 for food pantries. You could also fund them at the lower levels that they proposed, if you or not include the food pantries or and then the educational assistance. Another principal group raised the idea of EAs for kindergarten, because right now they're for next year, only Title I schools with students of class sizes of 20 or more will receive an EA. So there is the option 1 that Kristen Johnson presented last week, which was to do something more based on fall balancing, so that if we had large class sizes in some communities, they would receive the EA. I think that it still wouldn't really be up to the PAC. It would be more of like the consideration of like the whole district and what's happening, of how those distributions would go. But the other option would be to do this kindergarten method. So then we would have a more succinct story and would be able to tell families, like, if we raise more money, we will add first grade, or, you know, and like have some sort of like rollout or plan of what that might look like. And then there was the idea of like setting that goal, like the $4 million goal, and what that could do. And some principals felt like that would inspire more donations, because it's staff, it's people in the buildings, than say the other interventions that we discussed. And then in high schools, there have been some cuts to career counselor and makerspace. So they said, you know, they might not use the EA, but they might use it as a portion of an FTE, because they are down to like adding 0.2, you know, on to a teacher, that maybe a CTE teacher that's like 0.5 teaching a certain subject. They're adding and having them do these other roles, so it would give them more flexibility to do that. So that was from high school principal. And that this is the final slide. This is one you've already seen. That would be if it was the 11. It's really hard with the average costs of educational assistance. Like, there's a lot of variability that happens when we have full-time employees, and depending on like which health insurance package they choose and things like that. So they're very conservative in the number that can be that we can afford to purchase. And so but there could be calculations that if there were leftover at the end of the year, that could roll over into the next year and be distributed. That what they don't want is to go, not have enough and then have to like figure out where that money would come from for those employees. And they're also contracted employees, they're union. So they're contracted for the full year. So that's it for the presentation. I will open the floor now for discussion.
And do we want to do some kind of like everybody gets to talk in turn kind of thing, almost like a jury where we all get to talk, or is it just sort of whoever talks the most,
I was thinking like a jury too, that we do like a straw poll, like just right off the bat, what's everybody leaning towards, and then we can certainly decide.
Well, and Trina, I think you had an idea. I don't know if your internet's working now about like having people, maybe do like a vote or have everyone speak for how would you like to do it?
Yeah, I think that everyone should get a chance to voice how they feel the money should be allocated or what ideas popped out at them. And then we can decide what the themes that each person has brought up, and then we can vote on. So, say for instance, if we decide that we want to fund food support as one of the options, or put out some of that money to food support, we can decide that's one of the issues we want to vote on, how many people want to vote food support. Once we figure out the issues that we actually want, or the top the areas that we actually want to incorporate, then we can start allocating or figure out how we'll distribute the funding, if that makes sense. But I feel like we should do it really quick. It shouldn't be any more than 5 minutes, but maybe a minute or two, just giving your top recommendations on what we should do with the allocations. We can vote on those ideas that we think are most important, and then we can decide how to do the actual allocation of the funding.
Can I ask a question before we get started in that? I missed the tail end of last week's meeting, and I apologize for that. The previous time when we were talking about the high impact tutoring, one thing that they had talked about was advancing it to the 4th grade in person. And so I don't know quite, like, I missed the conversation of how it went from the current 1st through 3rd grade to online K through 2, or a 5 for the 5th graders. But I only bring it up because I felt like the advancement in the learning curve for the teachers, if we did it in person, moving it up a grade level seemed like a natural shift of both, like for the students and for the teachers, just shifting it up a grade as opposed to starting a new curriculum from the children. And so does anybody know how that shift happened, or what the reasoning behind that is?
The learning acceleration team took it back and like came up with that proposal. I think it's around their capacity, the staffing of how much they can like supervise and like adding on. And so, I said, well, you consider that, that could come out of the money, if you needed another person to supervise it, and then you have the tutors or that. And that these other programs were other things that they had really been wanting to do and looking at the research and seeing like how you can have an impact on a lower dollar amount. So that was what they put forth, but they didn't give a lot of explanation to the group about it that you missed.
I'm happy to go first with my.
I'm gonna say, does anybody want to go first?
Okay.
Thank you, Susan.
And I'll be quick. So I have a negative reaction to technology, putting more technology into our schools when we're trying to get rid of technology in our schools at some levels. So in literacy seems hugely important, not only locally and at the state level, but also nationally. We did very poorly when it comes to literacy based on NAEP testing, national tests for looking at the past 4 years. So I highly recommend 5th grade reading technology, despite my fear of burdening teachers with that. And for that reason, I'm leaning towards not supporting any other technology. Paloma seems highly inequitable when there are families that don't have Wi-Fi at home or even cell phones. So to assume that, some folks are going to be able to use that app or even have the rigor or time at home to apply that app, putting that on the families, I don't think we should do that. And then finally, I definitely support, I think I said food support for an equity element, and then food pantry, and then $100,000 to $200,000 seed money. And I haven't done the math on all of that, but that's where I'm leaning, because I think that seed money, as well as the 5th grade reading, will push folks to supporting future donations down the road. And we make a goal of going after EAs and headcount fundraising and putting numbers before the public as to what we need to raise in order to hit those. I'm done.
I can go next. I also think that the 5th grade reading thing is important. And I would add that I think that the high school algebra stuff is important too, because I mean, anecdotally, I have a couple friends and they're taking algebra and it's a hard class, and a lot of people like not doing well early on in math really does set them up to do worse, and it's really stressful and hard to make the credit recovery for math compared to other classes because it's just worksheets and stuff. So I think that that's also a good investment. And then yeah, I do also support the food and the seed money if possible. And I think that all 4 of those might work out pretty close to $1 million between the 4 of them, because the IXL is actually pretty cheap relatively for the impact. It did like 7 big number of students, and then really probably the best money per dollar, or I guess education per dollar. I don't know what the metric is.
You can go next. I think I want to look primarily at what will inspire giving for the next year. And I think, and what will create a strong foundation system, a strong fundraising system. So I think the 100 to 200 that Suzanne mentioned for fundraising, I don't find the tech inspiring. I asked my foundation and a couple teachers, and they're not inspired by technology, that it's just another app. We've had lots of apps. The 5th grade might be okay because it's a human on the other end, but I myself feel very tired of online learning. And in fact, I don't want to give any money to that because it's just not inspiring. Okay, so that's my take on tech. Maybe the 5th grade thing though, because the humans involved. In terms of what I do think is inspiring, I think the EAs to kindergarten would be inspiring, because that's our core. Like originally we were set up to be talking about staffing, and so that we could have this be like a seed and set a strong goal. Like, we are giving you staffing, as you said, to the most high needs, because we don't have the money for everyone now. But our goal is to give some kind of an equal staffing allocation to everyone. So our goal is 4 million to get, I think it was 4 million to get everyone every elementary school a half an EA, the numbers, just something that we can aspire to in the short term. So I liked that as like aligned with what we had, what we're here for, what this money was raised for historically. But we give it to the people who need it most this year, facing reality, but have that strong goal. And that's it. Oh, I will say, I hate to say this, but I will be the one to say it. I don't love food pantry because I think our our core mission in this is educational, and there's lots of grants and fundraising that can happen around this very core issue, and I will be happy to help write a grant, but I don't think that's what this niche is for. I think it's got a lot of appeal to it, but it can be done outside of this sort of educationally focused, people staffing focused money. So I feel that human need, but I'm not sure this is the place for it. So that's it for me.
I'll go next. Let's see. So I think one of the things that really strikes me from what Deborah Kafori said is that, we're being thrown into this process, and the way she had described it was like a PhD level course on what PPS does. And I'm totally ill-equipped to really fill that role, honestly. And so what we've been presented are these few programs that represent, 5% of all the universe of the programs that are out there. So in that way, I feel like it's a very biased process that we've been exposed to. Because I went on the Portland Public Schools website. There's like 40 plus programs that we could be considering, but we've been exposed to like 5%. So it's a very biased process, if you ask me. And part of it, this is born out of the fact that we have an untenable time frame to do this. It's just impossible, if you ask me. So I think what I finally came out of this was that the three things where I would focus these funds would be the community school model. I think that's like a holistic approach to student achievement. It reaches the most kids, in the elementary school. It's not geared towards Paloma, which is K through 1, or, this 5th grade high impact tutoring. It covers a broad range of students. Next would be food pantry, and then definitely a strong component of fundraising. And that's it.
I can go next if you want. So I thought a lot about this, and originally I was leaning towards the concept of, this mixture of the Paloma and the different texts, reach the most people, and so we could reach 10,000 students instead of just a few with the EAs. But I recently got my newsletter from my school, where the principal is laying out for people, because of these $40 million budget cuts, these are the different positions that are going to go away, or the different staffing that's going to go away. And I think what this is, like Isla said, really a commission on staffing, and these donations were for staffing. And so I feel like if we're going to want to inspire people to continue to donate to this concept, I would really advocate for the EA concept, or getting some human beings in there, so that when parents are continuing to contribute, they're thinking that it's specifically the more we contribute, the more we give, the more human beings are actually going to be going into these schools. Even if we only get to start with 10 people, even if we only start with 7 people, we're still showing that the committee is for making more staff in the schools. And so if they continue to fundraise over the years and years, then hopefully we get to have more and more and more people that we add. Even if it was 5 people, because I feel like people have mentioned, if we focus entirely on the different apps and whatnot, or the different online learnings, whatever it is, I don't really think that's really what people thought the money was going to be for. And again, I love the idea of food pantries and being able to help people who can't eat food, or can't provide for the food, right? But again, that isn't really what people thought this was going to be for. And so I personally feel like we should make it about, and I also think it would be a very synthesized, simple concept that we can advertise for and fundraise for. That, yes, because of those budget cuts, look at all these counselors and EAs and whatnot that you guys lost in your schools. And by giving to this cause, you're going to get some of those people back. And we're going to continue to keep on growing that over the years. So I strongly feel like it should really be wrapped around that concept. I'm not sure. Oh, I just froze there. So that's my personal opinion. And I guess there could be some kind of potential for the community focus that David just mentioned, though I guess I don't 100% understand what human beings are put into the schools for that program. So if that actually is providing humans that come in and be a part of that community, then maybe that could also be a viable kind of concept too, because that's also advertising to parents that the more that they donate, the more actual people are coming in and helping their kids. So that would be my feelings about it.
I can go next. Sorry, I've been sort of a lurker in this committee, but I really have been listening. I'm coming from, so I'm sort of representing the alternative schools, and we were just told that we just lost 4 teachers at MLC. And so it's disheartening, but I agree that what we're trying to spend money on is people, and that the more adults you have in these buildings, the better. There is pots of money for food pantries, but I agree, like right now we're talking about people, and I totally echo the sentiment that I do not want to spend a single cent on technology or another stupid app. That would be PR wise, we would be laughed. I mean, people would freak. So I am not for that. So I would vote, my tops would be the high impact tutoring, the one-on-one tutoring for, ideally, it would be for every kid who's troubled in the district, and to not be focused on just the 20 Title I schools, because like someone mentioned, there's these high level schools that have a lot of money, and then there's like the Title I schools that have very low, low income. And then there's this whole pool of other kids who are struggling in schools that are just sort of in the middle. So ideally, the high impact tutoring would catch all the kids that need help in every school. Another would be an EA. Obviously, you cannot have a kindergarten class of 30 kindergartners, 5-year-olds, and 1 teacher. So yes, EAs. So high impact tutoring, EAs, and I guess those would be my top 2.
Thank you. Annika, you want to speak?
For me, my priority list would be starting off with the EAs at the top, because I feel like getting those people into the schools and talking and being there with the students and helping all teachers get what they need is the most important. Following that up with the one-on-one tutoring, I feel like getting into middle school and just making sure that kids have the skills they need at that point in their education is more important. And then third would be the IXL, just having personal experience with the app. I think it can be a helpful tool. And I know we don't want to take away class time, but I'm not sure how much student engagement we would have if we had it outside of the classroom. So I'm just not sure how efficient it would be.
Thank you. And I think Audrey.
Thank you guys all for your time. Going at the end, I feel like I got a lot of perspective of a lot of your thoughts. So thanks for helping in the brain world. I really like I would echo the sentiment of there are other funds that can help with the food pantry. I think one thing that the foundation and the parent fund dollars could do with FTE is something that is really special, and there's not a lot of other ways to raise funds for that specifically. So while I think there is nobody here who doesn't believe that every person should have food on their plate, that this is also a very specific fundraising dollar that we can use. So I think we should, I like that reflection on that. I also agree with like the fundraising. I think that the fundraising will have to be different for a PPS wide to get money in, where I don't think you're going to get the same parent dollars you got in from a school. Like Lincoln parents aren't going to give the same amount to a PPS fund that they gave to a Lincoln fund that gave 30% to. So we might have to look more at corporations. I think there might be a different strategy as far as how that money's raised, and to get those dollars in, we probably have to have somebody who's somewhat, or a couple people who are dedicated into getting those funds, because they're not going to come from the same pocketbooks that this money came from previously. I think those pocketbooks are probably going to find alternative ways into their own community schools. I think the EA thing is just so difficult because it's so hard to spread across schools. I'm sad that we didn't look, or maybe I would like to look, or advise that we look more into just enhancing the high impact tutoring program to where it is, or expanding it slightly, as opposed to jumping into the Paloma project or jumping into the 5th grade product. Like, I know at our school that there were a limited number of students who gained the benefit of getting that tutoring. Like, there were X amount of spots K through 3rd, and depending on how well your teacher advocated for you, depending on if you got into that, and that's the age group, or sorry, I think it's first through 3rd, depending on how that worked for you. And that's the time where you're learning to read as opposed to reading to learn. And so that's why one of those reasons that portion is so significant. And I will say I'm on the benefit, both of my children are in the high impact tutoring program, and they are doing so well, and it's been so beneficial. And I know there's other kids in our school that aren't in it because my kids are. So I guess that's part of the reason, like I've seen huge growth in that, and I would like other children who are in need at that age group be able to find those same things. The one-on-one, I think I would say, similar to echoing something somebody said earlier, but like, you know, PPS has always had this macro lens on how we delegate our funds, which I think I've pointed out multiple times. Sorry if that annoys anyone. But like within every school, what we have is also our micro lens. So even if you're at Lincoln, or you're at Dunaway, or you're at Alameda, like no matter where you are, there's kids in your school who don't have those funds or don't have that support. And so I think that like what the foundations had done previously is be able to support some of those children within that lens. And maybe it's not because of economic, maybe it's because learning or some other issue, but like, how do we support everybody within our school? And I think that's important to every family, because we all know we're only as good as our weakest links. And I think one thing we didn't talk about, but I heard Daniel reference, and it's one thing that I see on the decline of our FTE every year is our counselors. And as our kids have all gone through COVID, that we see that more and more behavioral issues. And at the same time, we're seeing the rate of our counseling hours just drop significantly. So I know we didn't really touch base on that, but Daniel kind of highlighted it, and I feel like it needs a echoing. Maybe it's something we could at least put in the fine print or subtext, and I think it's something we could focus on in the future, because I think it is supporting our people mentally as well as educationally. Like, we know that they could have just as huge of an impact within the learning and development of those children and those children surrounding their peers. So that was what I had.
I believe that was everyone except me. And like Audrey said, I am very thankful to go last, because I get to hear what everyone's insight was, and I appreciate Daniel for kind of bringing us back and saying, you know, the point of the committee and what people are expecting from us is to put folks in buildings. And even if it's 10 people, being able to say that we successfully put folks in buildings is important. That being said, I was feeling the same way about most folks and the technology. I feel like it's great in concept. I really like the IXL. Um, and I was really leaning because it's a really low um, percentage of the fund in comparison to everything else. And so if we had to do technology, my thought was doing IXL. I really am thinking about how do we get folks in the building. And so my other thought was I really appreciated the talk around EAs and having EAs in kindergarten. It feels like a very slow way, I say that to say I would much rather have way more EAs. But we have to start somewhere. We don't have much, and if we are going to set the groundwork for the next committees, do we want to tell them, what are we saying is important to us today to kind of inspire where this should be going in the future? Was kind of where my thoughts is on that. And so my third thought was if we don't do that, then maybe considering a per school model. I'm not opposed to that. I feel like we could still, each school could then have their own discretion on how they would use the funding. And likely, if we get a per school model, just from what I could see with what we had for each school, it's not going to fund a whole anything. And so while I like the idea and I like the framework for moving forward in future years, I don't know if it works well for us this year. And so as much as I like it, I'm on the fence about that. So those are my top three. Those are my top three ideas on what we should be doing with the funds. And so I just want to take a moment and maybe give anybody that might have anything more to say, something to say. But I think that next we can just kind of outline what some of the themes I see and what folks are liking, what they aren't liking, and we can just vote, just a simple vote, and we'll move forward with the maybe top three ideas. And figure out how to then allocate the fund with time. Where are we at time wise? It's 6:45. And Susan, go ahead. See, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wish I got to go last because Audrey was so right about listening to everybody else. And I'm like, oh, dang it. EAs are so hugely important. I do want to make a point about some concerns for funding EAs this year. The 1 million that we're using was supposed to be allocated to communities that traditionally did not raise foundation funds. So I wonder how that will be received. Essentially, it's giving, even if it is true that, or if any of the EAs go to communities that raised a lot of money in the past year, then it's just sort of completely washing out equity entirely in the distribution. And then I can support funding EAs if it's PPS who decides where those EAs end up. Instead of creating a formula that we instill trust in PPS to put those EAs where they're really needed, when they're needed, because we have that issue of enrollment balancing that occurs all the way up through October. And that was raised as a problem for us in allocating funds for EAs, as well as the instability created if the funds don't come through the following year. So I just wanted to raise those issues. I actually really like Trina's idea of per school allocations for the future. Yeah, so that's it. And I'm okay with tossing technology out.
I also wanted to add the reason I'm hesitant to vote for EAs is just that if we don't make the money, they're gonna get pulled, and I feel like having something and then losing that thing is gonna be a lot worse than just like not having the thing at all. Because while it's possible to manage, not having enough teachers, like it's not a good situation. I feel like it would be worse if we had schools that relied on that extra teacher and then lost it and suddenly were like out of a person that they could rely on. I feel like that would be particularly bad for EAs in like kindergarten classes where you really would need that second person, and not having them anymore might like significantly make it harder to run the kindergarten classes.
I think Station, the concern though is that's what's happening now. They're cutting, they have EAs in Title I kindergartens, and they're getting rid of 18 of them, and they do rely on them now, and they're getting rid of 18 of them and only allowing them in really big kindergarten class sizes. So I envision the EAs as sort of mitigating exactly what your concern is. And hopefully we could continue that. But right now is the thing that you're afraid of is already happening. They have these people they rely on. Next year they're going away. But I should say also, I'm not stuck on EAs. After listening to everybody, I forgot about high impact tutoring. That's humans too. That's staffing. I feel like we got distracted a little bit. I like that too. So that's my second round.
Well, I think that the high impact tutoring, the nice thing is it does put people in the classrooms, but it allows the allocation to not just be directed towards one school, or, often like teachers might be a 0.4 or something so that they don't receive health benefits. And so I think with the high impact tutoring program, maybe it's something where people can receive a full salary and full benefits, but be able to work at multiple schools, which I don't think that there's a lot of flexibility in the funding for, and I'm not sure, Deborah, maybe you can clarify if that's true or not, where people can work amongst schools to be able to also not be cut out of that full paid position. Because while we all like to save money, we also want to support our community and their benefits.
I think I'm answering your question right. The district really tries to limit the number of schools that a person has to teach at or work at to 2. Maybe on a rare occasion it's 3, but if it's 2 schools, it's just like, and it's not 2 in one day. They try to do like Monday, Tuesday, one school, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, another. I don't know if that was what you were talking about. How many schools people are working at?
I guess it was do high impact tutors have more flexibility as far as they can work across multiple schools than an EA, or is it?
That's a good question. Robin, do you know that answer?
I think when Emily was talking about it, she was saying they have these limited term employees, EAs, that they're using for the high impact tutoring, but I think they were still using them only at 1 or 2 schools. So they had pretty small hours, but I think they could, yeah, I think if you increase it more, the costs go up significantly, because then they're full-time, then they have all the benefits and such. So that was why if you had more full-time people split amongst the schools, it's actually costs more than if you just have like a limited term, like doing targeted one school. That's my understanding of their model.
Daniel, did you have a question?
I guess that did I guess miss something in the earlier slides where we have this breakdown of a certain amount per EA, but was there some kind of cost breakdown for doing high impact tutoring? Not the online one, but like where you guys are talking about actual people coming in and doing tutoring.
We don't have that information. I would have to go back to that team and find out.
So I think there could be a valid concept of like, well, we did some EAs and we also did some high impact tutors. Both of them are human beings who go into the schools and help people. I think both of those would still be appealing to parents who are trying to get increased staffing.
And David,
So I like the idea, or I can get on board with the idea of hiring EAs, but we tend to talk about this concept in kind of a nebulous term. So if we accept the idea that we want to hire EAs, what is the specific recommendation that we would provide to the board? I mean, we haven't talked about that. What EAs are we talking about? What programs would the EAs support? What schools would the EAs support? I'm just not sure what is the specific recommendation we would provide regarding EAs.
and that would be the next part of the conversation that we have. It's 6:54, sorry. And so I want to vote on these specific parts, and then we can go into the details of just that. Like, what if we decide that EAs is the thing, what does that look like? If we decide that high impact tutors is a thing, what does that look like? So just real quick, there's 4 kind of categories or 4 areas of each. I separated out from things that are specifically staffing and things that are just outside of programmatic. And so we'll vote on the outside programmatic stuff first, and then we'll decide which of the staffing things that we would like. And so the things that we brought up as a group was food support. Just a quick vote, hands up if you think that we should continue the talk with food support. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll move on to this is the online high impact 5th grade tech. All right, I think I got that. This next item is going to be fundraising.
I know you're in the middle of voting, but I feel like there was a slide in the beginning that basically said that PPS was helping with financing, but I don't really know what that actually means or how much financing that would be. So is there already financing being provided for this stuff, or would we have to supply it, you know?
Okay, and the last in this category is the IXL, the high school tech, who all supports, and I'm sorry, I should have told you my hand was up for fundraising, and my hand is now up too for IXL. Okay. So the next item, these are staff related items, EAs in the classroom. I think what the models that we were looking at were kindergarten to start, but we can discuss further.
Point of
So let's just-
clarification, we're voting for the 1 million, right? Not future recommendations.
No, not future recommendations,
Okay.
just what we're doing with this 1 million. Yes. Should we have EAs with this 1 million? Okay. And how many people like the thought of a per school allocation? Okay. Um, and counselors, sorry, I'm gonna change that. We didn't talk much on counselors, but it was brought up, and so I want to make sure we vote on it. Um, how many people support count? Thank you. And then these are high impact tutors, but in the live classroom setting, so not just the 5th grade test. All right.
I
So
wonder, given the time, I wonder it if we might see if people would be interested in meeting next week, and I could get some information about these different ideas and costs and email them out, or we could do email correspondence next week if people don't want to meet.
I can meet.
I'll be out of town. I have a question as far as, I mean, when is the next board meeting that we're giving our recommendation to?
April 8th.
April 8th. I guess my question would be like, we voted based on this. What is the next step? And could we say this is kind of where our percentage within our group is at? What's your feedback? Like, where will they meet us in the middle? Like, I just, as far as time and investment purposes go, like, are there any places that we're barking up a tree that we're not going to get anywhere, or like, how much is one more meeting going to give us? And Deborah, maybe you can speak to this, and how much, like, if we came in with a more finite, or if we came in and said, here is where we're focusing, like what holds more weight or gravity in our presentation at that point.
Yeah, and I know you guys had wanted to wrap up tonight, but I do think having a more structured proposal to them would be better, because then they won't have the time to go through and make heads or tails. I think what you guys have come up with, or what it looks the direction that you're going, is going to be really powerful. So I think coming to them and saying, we want, and you can either do it dollars or percentages or whatever, but we could say we want 70% to go to high impact tutoring, 20% to go to fundraising, and 10% to go to whatever the last one was. So I don't know what I do. I wasn't keeping track. Trina's got the numbers there, but I think something like that would be more powerful than just saying, here's our ideas, you guys choose. Because I think they'll be expecting more specificity.
Okay, and then a follow up on that. Is there any way, I mean, there's Google Forms, there's voting, there's Survey Monkeys. I feel like us waiting another week and having us, like, the discussion isn't the only way to move forward. Like, maybe there's an in-between of, like, having a report that comes out that everybody votes on, kind of within the criteria that we just waited on today. Does anybody have any objections to, like, having a midway step in between now and a discussion point, or what do you guys feel about that?
Just where it would take more time than just having a meeting, like lots and lots of back and forth.
And we could do kind of a combination. I think where people could weigh in on, you know, if they can't be at the meeting, but I think, I would like to have a little bit more direction on before I get the dollars and scenarios of like what exactly I think what one big outstanding question I heard is just like, what would it take to have high impact tutors in the classroom? And like, you know, and I don't think we have that information to vote on right now. And if we were doing EAs or high impact tutors, I'm not sure that we'd have a lot of room for also adding a lot of the other things, but that's where I could run different scenarios. And so people could respond to those. Like this would be, you know, including the 5th grade tutoring for the highest need, not all students, you know, but and the fundraising, you know, so people could swap, you know, you could do A, B, C, D, you know, of the same things, but in different scenarios. That's what I'm envisioning.
I
And then
think without funding, without funding numbers, the high impact tutor submission seemed to be pretty much unanimous. I'm not sure if I got all the votes, but looking through it was like all of us or most of us. So I think definitely getting numbers on that would be really useful. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I wrote, that was the highest number that I saw, 7. Several of the other items were 5. For fundraising, EAs, and per school distribution, I saw 5, and then the other items had 4 or 3 or 4, if I got that right.
Yeah, that sounds great, Robin. When do you think the soonest you could get those? I'm just personally trying to figure out how to, after spending the time on this committee, just trying to make sure I can have my voice heard in the end as well. I'm going to be on a 4-hour time difference, and I know that's my own personal problem, but when could, if I could get that information ahead of time during the day or the day before, I could write a like written response, or if there were certain questions you had within that, like if you were wanting to allocate a percentage in different ways, how could you do that? I'm just wondering just because it's spring break, how somebody might be able to allocate or contribute to the discussion if we're not able to make the meeting since is a newly proposed time.
Yeah, and I know it's been challenging because not having the information beforehand. I think I could have it by the end of the day, Monday, the latest. And I could do a Google survey and everyone could vote, and then we could have a discussion about it next Wednesday at the same time. So we would go into it with sort of like maybe be much further along. And then we might have some time to talk about a goal setting, or like maybe there's a subcommittee that want to, you know, talk about how we present the information to the board, like what details we want to include in that. So we could talk about that. So would this same time meeting time work for people who are able to meet next week? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Trina, was there anything else you wanted to do today, or does that sound like a plan?
No, that sounds good. If you need my help at all with any of the putting together of this, we can talk separately. I don't know if I don't know if you have my email. You should have my email.
Yeah, I have 2 of your emails.
Yeah, let's get together and put together some of this stuff so that they have a lot of information. So the next meeting could possibly be shorter too. We can just talk about what we voted on and moving forward. One thing that I keep forgetting to say, and so I'm sorry if I'm holding you guys a little bit longer. is there parameters around, or can we set parameters around how early the committee meets next time? Like, I feel like we were rushed into spring break to kind of get this together. And so maybe next committee doesn't have that same rushed feeling of, because it's a lot of information. It's a lot to ingest, and it's a lot to come to a conclusion with, 8 other people. And so I just want to make sure that we are outlining guidelines for next time. That just gives folks more time.
If
Yes.
I remember correctly, the next committee is going to be meeting like quarterly or something like that, and
Mhm.
Okay,
across the
okay.
whole school year, as opposed to just like I think we were supposed to start meeting in January, I want to say, and timing just happened to us, but the other committees are supposed to have longer for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I think it will be helpful to be able to track what's actually happening too. And it may make most sense to have fundraising beyond the calendar year and it still be around the same time when they're making the decision for next year. Because then you would have like time to raise those funds. But that this is very informative to that process of like, figuring out what it should be, the details.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Robin, because I know, I mean, like, since this is a new year and a new committee, that it's trying to put all together all the pieces and present it in a fair and equitable and way that's, that represents everybody's voice. I appreciate all the work that you put into it. So I just want to say thank you.
I want to say thank you to everyone. You've put so much time and energy into this. You'll be getting your PhD diplomas in the mail very soon. I have to jump because the superintendent is calling me, and well, good staffer. So thank you. Hope to see you. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
All right, thank you so much. If you have more questions or feel free to email me and I will work on getting these scenarios together and some more data for us.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Robin. And thank you, Trina, for coming in to help her out too.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah,
Thanks everyone for a great conversation too.
thank you so much.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Hi.